This is Conversations
with Ronnie Keith
and Iris. Thank you for joining us today with Conversations with
Ronnie Keith
and Iris. Thank you guys so much for your support with the podcast. We are so grateful, so thankful. We really appreciate everyone that has wrote in for fan mail. We will get to that on the Ronnie Keith and Iris Conversations episode.
That's
We'll
coming
read
next week for sure?
next
Or no?
week for sure, of course, yes.
Yeah.
And so we will definitely talk to you guys, answer your fan mails, and go over everything that you may have. We really want to take the moment to thank the countries that have really taken the time to download us. Hungary, Australia, United Kingdom, Ukraine, France, Germany. We really want to take the time out to thank that. Thank you all, Sydney, New South Wales, a place called Pomas, Pest County. I don't know.
Oh, wow. Look at that.
Budapest has downloaded us. Hoboken, New Jersey, Portland, Oregon, Denver, Colorado, Stevenson Ranch, California, very big supporters of us. Indianapolis, Indiana, and a lot of other places, of course, around the world. And of course, our local town here, local city, Orlando, Florida, continuing to support us. So thank you so much for that. Maybe your week has been good?
Very good. How about yours?
It's been going all right. It's been moving pretty fast.
Yeah. And then today, we're just ready to get up on this beautiful Saturday and just conquer the world, right?
Absolutely.
We're ready to hit it out.
So today, as usual,
I'm excited about today.
Have a very special guest joining us for Conversations with Ronnie Keith. As Iris said, very, very excited about the person that we have on today. Today we have on Sharon Dunlevy. She is an advocate, and when I bring Sharon on, hopefully I pronounce her last name right. She is an advocate for foster kids with special education. Sharon has 2 master's degree, a doctorate in family ministries, and a graduate certificate in education law from Indiana University. Sharon's ability to merge her educational background with child welfare and insight sets her apart. She fills a crucial gap by addressing both the educational needs and the emotional well-being of foster children.
I love that. And her presence radiates truth, clarity, and just a fierce compassion overall. She's a coach, an intuitive, and someone who has helped countless women reconnect to themselves on the deepest level. Without further ado, welcome to the show, Sharon Dunlevy. Did we say your last name correctly?
It's actually Dunlevy. Yes.
Dunlevy. Oh, I love that, Dunlevy. That's beautiful.
Dunlevy is with the A.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for correcting us there.
No problem.
How are you doing today, Sharon?
I'm doing great. I'm as excited to be on here as you're excited to have me. So I love that intro. Made me feel really good.
My God.
Well, you are. You're very special. So Sharon, we really appreciate you taking the time. And this is really the first time that we have ever really talked with or even thought about someone like you, which is, an advocate for, educational training and teaching for children in foster care. So let's start from the beginning.
Yeah.
How did you get started in doing this work? This is God's work, is what I would say.
This is like a path you've always knew you wanted to take. I'm just curious. Let's unpack that a little bit. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So actually, I kind of came to it from a circuitous route. I started wanting to work with children when I was in high school. We had a preschool in our high school, and I was part of the child development class and just loved working with the kids. So when I went into college, I went to get a degree in teaching and special education. So that's my background. But while I was in college, I actually felt called to ministry. And so I was a children's minister for 20 years.
Oh,
And
wow.
wanted to start a special needs ministry in my church and didn't get a lot of support, unfortunately. So I decided to branch out, and I went and did some secular jobs. But with my education, my special ed background, I got really interested in education law. And at the same time, a job came open for an educational advocate for children in foster care at a licensing agency. I'm in Indianapolis, so at a licensing agency in Indianapolis.
Okay.
And I applied, got the job, and I had never really worked with foster kids, but I knew special education. And so that's when I got that graduate degree or that graduate certificate in education law, because I wanted to make sure I was representing all the laws that apply to foster kids with their education needs. And there are three of them. And so that's what I did. I would go into the schools, make sure the kids were getting the education support that they were supposed to by these laws, as well as helping the foster parents learn how to enhance their education at home and teach them independent living skills for when they age out. So we try to cover the whole gamut of that journey for them.
All right, Sharon. So let's take it back here, just for our audience and for us, of course. Can you educate us on what special needs education is? I know that that was something that you tried to start ministry on, as you talked about, and you got your background in education in. So, can you educate us on what that is and how it differentiates from, K through 12 education, things like that that you hear different from special needs?
Sure. So, special education refers specifically to children with disabilities. They could be developmental disabilities or they could be physical disabilities. I work with the developmental disability side. So things like reading delays, maybe having even ADHD. My kids with in foster care, they have trauma, so they have PTSD and other issues that can cause them to have a delay in how they learn. And so what happens is under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, children with a developmental disability can get what's called an IEP or an individualized education plan. And what
Okay.
that does for them is they get specific accommodations. So, for example, a child who has a math delay, they would be able to possibly use a calculator in class to help them stay at the same level as their peers. A child who has a delay with reading may have a pull out period where they work one on one with a reading coach while the rest of the class is reading all together because they can't keep up with the rest of the class. So it gets them that extra help. They could have extra time on tests if they have a severe anxiety issue. They can get extra time on tests or even take the tests in a smaller room so they're not getting distracted. So, those are the types of things that they can get under that Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And it really does help them learn better and be able to graduate and live an independent life.
Hmm.
And Sharon, you had mentioned something very enlightening. You mentioned four laws, correct? What are the
Three.
three laws? So you
Yeah.
mentioned three laws regarding foster care. Can you help us unpack that a little bit and talk about that? What do those laws look like, and what do they mean?
Sure. So the first one that I already talked about was the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And basically, why I use that law is because trauma physically affects brain growth. When a
Mm.
child suffers trauma, their brain actually grows at a slower rate than a child who does not have trauma. And so they need that extra help. Now, the brain can recover, and that's the best thing about our brains. We're learning that our brains are designed to be repaired. So that learning delay from the trauma doesn't have to be permanent if we use the right tools. And that's where that Individuals with Disabilities Education Act comes in. The other
Okay.
law that works is what's called Every Student Succeeds Act. Way back under Bush, we had No Child Left Behind.
Hmm.
And then Every Student Succeeds Act replaced that. And before that law, what we call ESSA, before ESSA, there was no special provisions for children in foster care. There was
Mm.
another law that covered children who were homeless, but children in foster care fell between the cracks because some states interpreted them as jumping from home to home as homeless, but other states did not. And so they weren't being covered consistently.
Mm.
So when ESSA came in, one of the things it wanted to address was the how much out of school time children in foster care had. They were missing school because they were moving from home to home and they had to re-enroll. Their paperwork wasn't following them like they should. They didn't have shot records, whatever, and the schools wouldn't enroll them. Or, I mean, I talked to a former foster kid 2 weeks ago, and he told me about how he had been to 30 schools in 10 years
Oh my
Oh my
God.
goodness.
because he was jumping from home to home. They weren't
Mm.
consistent. So, what the Every Student Succeeds Act did was it allowed for children in foster care to stay in whatever school they're in, even if their home changes and that home is out of district. So, the schools actually have to provide transportation for the foster kid to stay in the best school for them, and that really made a difference. The other thing it did is if they do have to change schools, they have to be allowed to be enrolled immediately, literally within 1 day. The
Mm.
schools cannot delay their enrollment because of lack of paperwork, all of this. They must enroll them immediately. And so that helps these students not be out of the classroom. They're already out of the classroom a lot because they have court dates, they have therapy appointments, they have all these other things. And so we want them in the classroom as much as possible. And that's where ESSA helps. The final law is actually not an education law. It's not under the Department of Ed. It is under the Social Security Act, but it's called Family First Prevention Services Act. And it's an act that was put into place to try and prevent children from having to go into foster care, but also it was put in place for help children who are transitioning out of foster care. So starting at the age of 14, every foster student should be creating a transition plan with their caseworkers on what are the independent living skills they already know, which ones do they need to learn, what do they want to do after high school, do they want to go to college. There's funds available through Family First to help them go to college. Do they want to do a vocational program? There's funds under Family First to help them get a vocational degree. And those funds, because it starts at 14, those funds could cover that child going to a vocational program during their high school years. And they could use those Family First funds to help cover those costs. Um, the other thing it helps with is, and it depends on how each state, how they implement Family First. But like, for example, in Indiana, children who graduate or are at the age of 18, where technically they're free, emancipated, they no longer have to leave care. It used to be you hit 18, didn't matter if you had a job, if you were still in high school, you were out of foster care.
Mm.
That goes all the way up to 23 now. And
Oh.
so here in Indiana, a student, you have to choose to be in the program. It's voluntary. But a student who takes advantage of the program can get things like help for rent,
Oh wow.
finding a job. I have a student who made very good use of all of these funds, and yeah, they helped him with rent. They helped him find jobs. They helped him get his driver's license. They would have helped him pay for a car, but he chose not to drive. He decided, but they helped him pay for a motorbike. Um,
Wow.
and the only thing they have to do is they have to be in school or working at least half time to constantly stay under this collaborative care program.
Oh, wow, Sharon. I love that you emphasize on that because I guess for us, millennials, if you say we've heard that, oh, once you hit 18, there really is no help or direction for these
Right.
foster children and what happens to that. So I was just very curious, how does that look? Is this just a state of Indiana, or does it also, is it also across the all other states in the US that they actually help kids have, you have mentioned to the age of 23, right?
Yes. So the law applies to every state.
Okay.
Unfortunately, not every state will take advantage of it fully.
Mm.
I was talking with somebody the other day and we looked up, it was Kentucky. We were looking up what does Kentucky do. Kentucky only helps up to the age of 21, I believe,
Mhm.
and they don't do transition planning until the age of 17. instead
Mm-mm.
of 14. Well, by the age of 17, it's almost too late.
Right.
You
Oh
know,
my gosh.
a bunch of the kids will have dropped out by then. If they're so far behind their peers and they don't feel like they have a future,
Hmm.
whereas if you start them at 14 and you're like, yeah, we're going to work on this and this to get your grades up so that when you do get to, 18, you can go right into whatever path they want. But by 17, it's a little hard to get their grades up enough to get them into college or something like that. So so it's implemented inconsistently right now across the country.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm so glad that they even help them like with rent and
Mhm.
education and all of that. That's so that and I learned
And
something new today. That's inspiring. That's awesome.
well, and transportation, that's the
Oh, good.
one big job gap that people don't think about. Here in Indianapolis, we have a very poor public transit system.
Mm.
And they've been trying to build it up some, but I mean, on the east side of town, there's a street called Keystone, and it's a very populous street, but it's very populated with poverty level families.
Hmm.
The bus comes once an hour through that
Oh
Mm.
area.
no.
How do you get to a job
Right.
Yeah, you gotta
Right.
wake up
on
like 2
time?
hours early or something like that,
Yes,
yeah. Here in
exactly.
Orlando, we have the links, and
Right.
still, I don't think it's the greatest way to transportation neither.
Hmm.
We have so much Uber and Lyft, but then again, it's so expensive to
It's
catch an Uber.
expensive. Yes,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, you're not going to find somebody with a low-paying job using
Yeah.
something like that. So I'm glad that Family First addressed that need for transportation because it is. They'll even pay for bus passes. Like
Oh,
Oh,
they'll
that's
that's
pay
wonderful.
yeah,
awesome.
they'll pay
Yeah.
for any of that stuff. Whatever the child needs in order to succeed as an adult. The hard part is, like I said, is just getting the states to actually use those funds consistently.
Right.
Um,
Oh, that's unfortunate, and I hope that more states are, need to advocate because I feel like foster kids are the forgotten
Yeah,
children of the world.
they are.
Yes, yes.
And, what you're doing is you're bringing attention to this. And so, with that, Sharon, I think that from an outsider's view, and I say outsiders because we're not doing the work you are, the thing that seems to be emphasized a lot is getting these kids in the home, getting the kids in the home, getting the kids in the home, right? And that's very
Mhm,
important. The part that you don't really hear about is the advocacy of education for these kids and
right.
what they're dealing with moving from foster home to foster home to foster home to foster home.
Mhm.
So, with your advocacy for this, how does that really work in detail with what you're doing, your work in general, what you do for these foster kids in the home for education?
Yes, so basically what I have found is it's important to empower the foster parents with this information.
Hmm.
So, and I know this is kind of a sad situation, but a lot of times the state case managers that ones that are hired by the state to be the case managers for these children often come right out of college.
Mm.
It's an entry level job. We
Right.
pay entry level amounts, and
Hmm.
so we're not ever going to get anybody with a lot of experience. So they come into the state to work for the children in foster care is more of a resume builder and a stepping stone.
Mm.
So we have a lot of turnover. So you can't rely on the caseworker to know these laws because they're not learning it in the higher ed programs, and then they're coming in and they're not there long enough to learn them. So I train the foster parents. That's what I do. I already have a contract with the state of Ohio for their educational advocacy part of training for their foster parents. I'm looking for more contracts with other states because what happens is if I train the foster parents on what the rights are for their kids, then it doesn't matter what kids in their home. They know their rights and they can advocate for them. So I'll
Mm.
try and do that boots on the ground training. I have reached out to departments of ed with offers to help train their staff, school staff. Haven't gotten a lot of positive reviews or responses.
Why do you think that is?
I think they know what they're doing, but I don't think they really do. And trauma informed schooling looks very different than what we do right now. It
Mm.
required rethinking of discipline. It's going to require schools to be able to put more money into instructional aids and all that. And we know that's not going to happen anytime soon because they're going to get less money from the federal government right now. So, it's bad timing in some ways in terms of trying to get schools to be able to change their climates. So there are schools out there and there are districts out there that are working very hard to do it, but it's not, again, not consistent. So that's why I focus then on the foster parents. Let the foster parents know what the laws are. If whenever
Mhm.
I train for any of the states, I go into their state's manuals and
Mhm.
how does their state implement Every Student Succeeds Act? How does their state implement Individuals with Disabilities Act? Those types of things to make sure the foster parents are armed because schools, they don't mean to be ignorant, but a lot of times they are. So, like I said, I have a training contract in Ohio, and I was teaching my educational advocacy class, and the one lady was like, "Yeah, well, um, my kid goes to a small charter school, and they told us they don't have to do IDEA because they're too small." And I was like,
Oh
"No,
wow.
they're a public school because charter schools are public schools. They get
Hmm.
public funds. They have
Yeah.
to follow federal law. It
Right.
don't matter how small they are, and they'll get money from the government for whatever they implement. So, so I that's the type of thing that the schools, and they may have been trying to pull a fast one on the parent, but
Right.
and no matter what, the parents need to know so that they can say, no, wait, I've got the law right here and it says you must do this.
Hmm.
And so that's what I do. I'm out there to educate the parents, but I also I'm out there to bring awareness. So that's why I apply for podcasts, and I apply for podcasts that don't aren't just foster care, right? Like
Hmm.
yours. I
Hmm.
did
Yeah.
that on purpose because I want to find people who are willing to talk with me about these things to their audience and help people understand what's happening in the world of foster care. Because, like you said, Ronnie Keith, we don't talk about it,
Right.
right?
That's
We
right.
The only
don't.
the only time I see anything mentioned about foster care is when I'm watching a TV show and they talk about how the child was a criminal
That's right.
and he was raised in the foster care system.
That's right. That's right.
And
That's
I
right.
I mean,
appreciate you reaching out to us and connecting with us because I think a lot of people need to talk more about
mhm.
foster care systems, and all the I mean, you're teaching us right now all the benefits that honestly we were still in the mindset age 18 a child pretty much gets cut off. They
Yeah.
basically go to the
Yes.
street.
Yes.
And I appreciate it because your heart for this particular type of service, Sharon, is undeniably is special. Like you go all the way when it comes to foster care and the work you've done to support others through these difficult transitions. It just resonates very well. So we appreciate that.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, I want to be the voice of people who don't have a voice, right?
Hmm.
That's
Hmm.
what I do. And so that's why, like I said, I try and bring awareness. It is a passion for sure.
Yes. Right.
I
Right.
may have come to it at a circuitous route, but it
Hmm.
is a passion for sure. These kids need somebody to speak up for them.
And
Yes.
and Sharon, I wanted to also go further beyond foster care because one of the things that really make your work stand out is how deeply you go beyond that into like the emotional, spiritual, and energetic healing that some of us are craving.
Mhm.
So like I want to talk about some powerful spaces that you hold or other areas that you focus on, like helping women reconnect with their truth, healed old wounds, and just tap into feminine, energy overall. Let's talk
Mhm.
about that.
Yeah. It like I said, I was a children's minister for 20 years. So I started my career in pretty much a men's world. I mean, children's ministers were pretty much feminine, but to be a pastor at all, that was a man's job. And there was a lot of push on me to become more masculine. And I really resisted. I resisted that idea that I needed to be more masculine in order to succeed. And it probably did hold me back, but I decided I needed to be who I was. And part of me is feminine. A lot of part of me is feminine.
Mhm.
And I needed to embrace that feminine energy and not try and fit in where I'm not comfortable. And so I do know it often set up conflict with me between not just men
Mhm.
who didn't like being told what to do, but set up even stronger conflict with women.
Mm.
Um,
Wow.
when I was going through seminary to be a pastor, there were only a few single women that were doing this, and I was the youngest, and
Mhm.
so I was a threat.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and then when I was actually in churches and some of the older women who had to embrace that masculine side in order to get where they want, did not like that I wouldn't follow their advice, you know?
Mm.
So the women were the hardest on me, but honestly, I needed to be true to me.
Right.
And so after a while, if I didn't fit somewhere, I'd just go somewhere else. But I think for children in foster care, that feminine energy works well, right? They
Yes.
need the nurture. They need
Yeah.
the one who's going to bond with them. They're lacking attachment.
Mhm.
I mean, I could go into all the psychological stuff, but really, kids in foster care with trauma, the biggest issue for them is trusting adults, feeling
Mm.
safe. And who brings off more of that sense of safety than a woman? And that's just
Yes.
because we are naturally caregivers.
That's right.
And
We
so,
are.
Natural nurturers too, you
Yeah.
know.
yeah,
That's what we were meant
yeah,
to do. I think
Yeah.
it just comes naturally.
Yeah.
it does.
Motherhood comes naturally. All that stuff. I feel like it all comes naturally to us. It's
And it
amazing.
doesn't mean we can't be in the workplace. It just means
Right.
Yeah.
we approach the workplace in a different way.
Mhm.
And so, yeah. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, and I just feel like when you're authentic with yourself, you're going to attract people to you. So foster kids, like I said, are very, very untrusting, and
Mhm.
adults have let them down over and over. But I felt like I could bond with them not because I'm trying to tell them I know what they're going through. I have no clue. I lived a privileged life. You
Mhm.
know, my
Mhm.
parents had money. We traveled. We
Mhm.
even lived overseas because my dad was in the military, officer in the military. So privileged that way too. I'm
Right.
very much aware I lived a privileged life, but I can listen. And
There you go.
so,
That's a gift.
yeah, I can listen. I can hear what they're saying underneath what they're saying. And so I find that, yeah, they will bond with that when I'm listening more than talking. You know, the
Mhm.
things that we always tell ourselves, but we don't always do. And I do it really well with my foster kids. Now, did I do it really well with my own child? I don't know.
That's understandable.
My
Maybe we should
own,
ask him.
yeah,
All
yeah. Well,
right.
he's 23 now, and yeah, I'm pretty sure when I when they labeled my best friend best mom,
Oh
but
boy.
anyways, I mean, so I just saying that in order for people to know I've made mistakes. We
Right.
all make mistakes,
That's right.
but that shouldn't be where we quit.
That's right.
And a lot of times, we give up, we quit, we get frustrated. A lot of fostering is as much managing our own emotions
Mhm.
and our own trauma as
Mhm.
it is trying to help the kids manage their own. And that's the big key too, is not we're not trying to manage their emotions, we're not trying to change them, we're trying to help them manage themselves.
Absolutely. And that makes a lot of sense. And, you know, I know it has to be frustrating, as you stated. There's a lot of things that are frustrating. What are some of the roadblocks outside of, dealing with the state, city, county, whoever, that it goes with the funding of it? What are some other roadblocks that you encounter when advocating for these kids? You don't
I think 7.
the public's view of foster care
Mhm.
and foster parents are probably pretty negative
Yep.
because of some of the depictions that we see in movies of how the kids
Mhm.
are mistreated by the foster parents. So what
Mhm.
are some of the roadblocks? And I gotta, just assume some of them may be the foster parents for you
Mhm.
to advocate on the kids' behalf.
Yeah, it's there are a lot of roadblocks, but the biggest one is that misconception of what fostering is. Um, I think because we don't talk about it in this country very much, there people just don't even know what foster care is. I've had people ask me about orphanages, and the
Mhm.
U.S. abandoned orphanages years ago. We do have residential facilities, but that's usually for students whose trauma is so severe that they're not a safe person in a foster home.
That's
But
right. You don't hear about
You
orphanages
don't.
anymore.
You don't. I wonder when was the last time they actually banned them or
it's around the 80s when they
really?
started, yeah, when they started see and 80s and 90s I think is when we really started to move away from that model.
Okay.
Yeah, there was a big critical study that was done about a Romanian orphanage and how the children, I mean, literally were half the size they should be, developmentally
Mm.
delayed, all of these things, all because of the maltreatment and the neglect. And like I said, it physically affects your brain. Well, it physically affects the body too. They literally were half the size that they should be and things like that. So I think that kind of spurred the movement to get rid of those orphanages. So we replaced them with foster homes. But people, like you said, they just don't really understand. So, a foster parent, to become a foster parent, you have to go through a lot of hoops. So,
Mhm.
anybody who does this, they're not doing it to make money. I don't, I mean, you don't make money on a foster kid because you barely get paid enough to cover their expenses, honestly. So that kind of idea that's out there that, oh, the foster parents only do it for the money. Yeah, there's probably a few that do it that way, but most of them are not going to do the amount of work it takes. I mean, you have to do classes before you become a foster parent. You basically have to surrender all privacy. They're going to be in and
Mhm.
out of your home all the
Mhm.
time. They have to pass home studies. Um, People get called on for abuse for no reason all the time.
Mhm.
That's a typical frustration for foster parents, is that they're accused of abuse and have cases opened against themselves and things like that. That it just, it's a lot of ways it can be very thankless in from the public's perception. Um, so that is a big roadblock, is just the public's perception of foster care. There's also there's a lot of anti foster care movements out there where they're trying to move more to what's called kinship care, where a child is placed with a family member. And I understand where they're coming from. The idea is that a child will fit or belong more with their biological family than they would with a family of strangers.
Right.
My objection is when they take kinship too far. So I have
Mhm.
heard cases where they have found a cousin twice removed in state three, 3 states away, never met the child, but
Mhm.
they're going to place the child with this person because they're a kin.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Wow.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they probably don't want the child. That's in the
Well,
first
yeah,
place.
or it's going to be great grandma who can barely take care of herself, let alone
Watching
a
a child.
child.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah, most of the cases, yeah.
so I understand the movement to it, but I think people need to be careful where it's getting support from, because politicians support it because they've changed the laws. Like here in Indiana, kinship foster family does not have to do as much training as another foster family, and so they're saving money on training them. They don't get the same types of stipends, so they're saving money on those stipends for taking care of the child. There's all sorts of things like that, that it's a
Mhm.
little more money motivated than I think people realize. And so I'm very cautious about, yes, if there is a loving kin member that can take care of the child and all of that, then, but one of the arguments I always have is, but that child still has trauma. because they
Right.
were, whatever happened to them, plus they were removed from their home. Being removed from their home alone is a trauma.
Yes.
So this child has trauma, and everybody's like, well, we don't need to be trained to be parents to children of our kin. However, you do need to be trained on how to handle trauma, because we
Right.
don't learn that. That's not a typical parent thing. You can't do it intuitively.
Right.
And so that's my big issue with kinship care is, are they really taking care of the child's trauma
Hmm.
when they're placing a child with a kin member who has no training versus a foster parent who does. So that's a big roadblock, is definitely, and we obviously never have enough foster parents because of all the negativity that's out there.
Right. Right.
So,
Absolutely.
And Sharon, for these foster kids, and this is just a question that I was thinking about, that they have gone through so much trauma or emotional suppression, you just being
mhm,
very disconnected, from earth, or from everything,
right.
what has been some tools that have helped these children basically start gaining trust with others, or in this case, will trust you or be more
Mhm.
open to you? How do they go through that roadblock?
So it is not an easy answer, Iris, but basically, when a child has trauma, the very first thing you have to do is make them feel safe, because they are living in what we call fight, flight, or freeze mode. Every reaction is going to be based on a survival instinct rather than a logical. And I could go into the whole brain science of this, but basically, trauma affects that prefrontal cortex that manages all of our logical thinking, and can cause that delay,
Hmm.
a delay in how that is formed. And so they live
Mm.
much more in that instinctual survival mode. So you have to make them feel safe. And I tell foster parents this all the time. The very first thing when a child walks into your home is you want them to feel safe. So things like open stance, body language is really important. Not putting your hands, like not crossing your arms when you're talking to them, or putting your hands in your pocket, because putting your hands in your pocket might mean that you're hiding something.
Hmm.
Mm.
Um,
That's true.
not getting up in their face, right? You need to have that distance.
Hmm.
Sometimes not talking. If they don't want to talk to you, you just sit with them and you
Hmm.
don't talk. And that's hard because, we want to feel silence. But those are things that we train our foster parents to do. Other things to do is making sure that you're connecting with them authentically. So rather than just using generic phrases like, oh, you did a good job, oh, you did great, really show that you're paying attention. Wow, you worked really hard on that picture, and I can see that you are getting better and better every day.
Hmm.
There's a huge difference, right? We
Hmm.
can tune out good job and great, but when they talk about something I've actually done, and the other thing I tell foster parents, and I've done myself, is you look for strengths. We tend to want to look for behaviors that we don't like, and then do a lot of corrections. I always flip it. I tell them, for every correction, you need to be giving three praises. So a child who is having a lot of emotional disturbance, and has something like conduct disorder, or oppositional defiant disorder, where they actually come out swinging. When they don't, when they have a confrontation with somebody, and you go, wow, you ended that and walked away, you didn't hit them.
Hmm.
Like,
Hmm.
make a big deal about that,
Yeah.
rather than
Yeah.
making a big deal about the fact that they were mad and they hit somebody.
Hmm.
Because one, they can't hear you when they are in middle of fight, flight, or freeze. They're not thinking, so they're not going to understand when you say that's not okay.
Right.
So you have to
Yeah.
wait till they're a little calmed down, but then you really praise them. Bring that praise out. Make them feel safe. Make them feel like they belong. They're not going to be able to co-regulate their behaviors until they feel safe and that they belong. So those are probably the two primary things that, as a foster parent, they need to do, is really build that trust and safety.
Okay, that sounds wonderful. Thank you for that, Sharon. One last question before we get out of here, and thank you so much again for your time with Iris and I.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
what can you tell and advocate for the different states, for their educational departments, to help with the process of what you do, which is educating the foster kids and making sure that they are attended to with education? What advice and what can you do to encourage any of the states that listen to this podcast
Hmm.
in their educational department? What would be such of a great help for you, people like you and yourself?
Sure. So, one is offering intensive professional development on trauma and what trauma means to the entire school, not just the special education staff. Because things like school resource officers who get up in kids' faces,
Hmm.
obviously that's going to trigger my foster kids, right?
Right.
Which means they may punch the school resource officer. Well, whose fault was that really? It wasn't the kids, it was the SRO.
Yeah.
But we don't talk about things like that. We don't, so they need to be trained in what's trauma informed care, trauma informed practices. And it's not just for foster kids. There's a lot of evidence today that every child has experienced trauma in some way just because of social media showing all the school shootings and things like that. So it is for every kid that we need to be opening up our eyes to what's happening in our world and what that does to our kids. The other thing is really work to build that relationship with the foster parents. So if you got a foster parent in your district and they're going to be sending multiple kids to your home to your school because that's what they do, they house them for a while and then they pass them on to their families or to an adoptive family or whatever. So making sure that that door is open and that you're working with them. Uh, and that makes a big deal. And I teach my foster parents that too, that they on their side need to be establishing a positive relationship with their schools so that when they do get a kid in their home and maybe it's a kid that has a little bit more problems than some others, that they're all able to work together on it rather than having an adversarial type of relationship. So, and the other thing I would suggest is just showing that the kids that you care is doing things like providing extra help for them. The laws do not state that they have to provide transportation for like after school activities and stuff, but the law encourages them to do that. Well, take that seriously because learning is not just about what happens in the classroom. It involves what happens on the sports field, what happens in drama, what happens in choir, all of those things. So we want our kids to have the same experiences that non-foster kids have, but maybe having to provide some extra transportation or something for them so that they can participate like that.
Wonderful. Thank you
Thank you
for
for
that.
that, Sharon.
Yes, absolutely. Sharon, where can people find you? Give a website or where people can find you to follow you, to reach out to you, to read some of your blogs, some of your,
Mhm.
your things that you've published, and to maybe
Testimonials.
connect with you.
Yes.
Where can our audience
Sure.
connect with you at?
Sure. So you can find my website. It is just Sharon Dunlevy, SharonDunlevy.com. And you can also find me on LinkedIn. Those are the best two places to find me.
Wonderful,
Thank
wonderful.
you.
Really appreciate that. And I mean, you have a lot of things on your website, a lot of insights, a lot of milestones, co-author of Educating Children in Foster Care and Principal Leadership.
Hmm.
You're a recurring presenter at the Education Law Association's annual conferences. And, all of the things the great work that you've done. And, please follow Sharon. And I really advocate for this for, anyone that's listening
Yeah.
to really step it up for the foster kids. As you were talking, Sharon, and just thinking back, my wife and I, Iris and I, we didn't know each other, but we went to the same high school, right?
Hmm.
And I just think back that there may have been so many foster kids there at school that we
Yeah.
didn't know
Yeah.
that we may have been friends with and didn't know that they were
Absolutely.
foster kids,
Right.
That could have needed help
Yeah.
or,
Hmm. Yeah.
friends.
And they don't always want you to know. Right.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Sharon, it has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining
Thank
Conversations
you.
with Ronnie Keith and Iris. We really thank you. As I stated earlier, you are doing God's work, and we really, really
Amen.
appreciate what you are doing.
Well, thank you. I really enjoyed being on here, Ronnie, Keith, and Iris.
Oh,
Thank you.
thank you so much, Sharon.
Yes, and this has been Conversations with
Ronnie Keith.
and Iris.